What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the shop. Today we are going to continue on with the Road to Drag Week, or our drag and drive prep. Today I'm going to bring the radio or the entertainment center, the stereo, whatever you call it, up to date in the Camaro, and I'm going to do that a couple of ways. So first off, I'm going to replace this old single DIN digital media receiver that I've had in the Camaro with a double DIN unit. We're also going to change out the speakers and install a backup camera for this radio. This install is going to be a little bit specific to my car. However, if you've got a third gen, you should be able to follow right along with this. The very first thing that I did was I picked up a double DIN installation kit from Screaming Chicken. Where I said this was a little bit unique to my car, I have a third gen Firebird radio pod with a fourth gen center console. However, if you've got a stock Firebird Trans Am, this will be more or less exactly what you're going to do. If you've got a Camaro, because they have different radios and center consoles, it will be very similar. They also have a kit for a double DIN stereo for that car. The next thing that I did is I picked up this double DIN JVC unit, model number there, and backup camera from Crutchfield. Previous unit was a JVC, so some parts of this were relatively plug and play. The wiring right off the bat was relatively straightforward. This car already had a wiring harness that matched the previous JVC, so most of the wires were very simple to just crimp and heat shrink. Here's where I deviated just a little bit. So I made a separate sub harness with 4-pin Deutsch, and I have the steering wheel input, the reverse, which we'll talk about in a second, the antenna control, and the park switch. There we go. You can see all the labels there. I ran those to that Deutsch connector, and here's why. All right, if you take a look, we've got our original radio wiring here. And then I have one wire on a 4-pin Deutsch. Because this is a Deutsch, you can always come back and add to it. But this wire is wired directly into my trans brake output from the NOS solid state relay. This triggers the radio to switch to the backup camera. The other three functions on that for my use doesn't really apply. The park switch lets the radio play video. I don't really care about that. The rest of the wiring up here, you're going to have RCA inputs or outputs, whatever you want to call it. We're going to use one for the RCA input of our China backup camera. The other that we have here is we have another connector for our GPS antenna. We don't have legacy FM anymore. That's going to stay. And then right here is going to be our USB that will do our Android Auto. And then I guess if you like inferior phones, you could also use Apple CarPlay or whatever that nonsense is. That is, for the most part, going to take care of the wiring for the installation of the radio itself. We'll talk about the camera here in a minute. What's up next? We just discussed the wiring. Now it comes for the install. The install is pretty straightforward. The radio install kit from Screaming Chicken comes with the L brackets for the radio itself. Those attached on each side, 2 fasteners on each bracket, and then each bracket gets 2 screws that hold it to the radio pod itself. We just got the harnesses installed. The GPS antenna, specifically for the radio, is installed there with micro USB with the security screw. Next step is that I took a piece of carbon fiber that I had left over from the door project and epoxied it onto this 3D printed trim panel, and then I also attached a USB bulkhead. So we will secure that in there. Shove the excess cable back there, pull out the cables for the thumb drive for the Pro Dash, make sure the cable for the Pro Dash clears there nicely, and that trim piece installs just fine. So, already tested, but USB-A to USB-C cable that came out of my Silverado. Plugs in there, connects to Android Auto perfectly. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to install the speakers in the rear. Sail panels, the two 6x9s. For the rear speaker swap, if you've never taken the rear speakers out of one of these cars, it's not too bad. You take this rear hanger hook out by removing this screw, and then you just lift and pull the panel. It slides out. I've had these Pioneer 6x9s in the car ever since I bought it back in 2010. They work as far as they make noise, but it was time for an upgrade. Two speakers side by side. The kicker just looks awesome, especially with this grill. However, it's not going to fit with the interior panels, so it's got to go. The terminals on the two speakers are essentially the same, so wiring is non-factor here. As well, the bolt pattern for all four holes is exactly the same. Installation of the new kicker will be a breeze. That's going to do it for the speaker install. Right now, I only have the two rear 6x9s because when I had the roll cage installed, I made sure to put the dash bar in. However, the dash bar occupies the same space that the front 4x6s would occupy. If I decide at some point that it needs front speakers again, or it needs more than the two speakers, I may go with pillar mounted speakers. They sound for like side-by-sides and ATVs and such. Anyways, now we're going to talk about the rear camera install. I've already run the wiring for the rear camera. It is pretty simple. Up the front, like you saw, it was the RCA. The RCA is a coax cable which has the positive and negative, one running through the other with an insulator between it. This camera specifically requires an additional power and ground to run the camera. This is an M5 cable. If you are unfamiliar with M5, it is an industry cable. Some of the Rife line of sensors use them. Anyways, it has 4 wires inside of it, which would give you the 2 that you need for the coax on the RCA, and as well the 2 that you will need for power and ground to run the camera. You saw up the front of the car in the cockpit on the radio pod, I ran that RCA cable. It goes up, runs along the dash bar, comes down the A-pillar bar on the passenger driver side, runs along the sill, it runs behind this trim panel. Back here, you'll see the ground for that, as well as right here is where it picks up power, and that is coming off of the reverse lights. There's no rear glove box in this car because this thing was useless from the factory. The camera itself is going to come by default with this license plate bracket, which, if I didn't always keep the laundry bag on here, would work great here. However, because I do, we're actually going to mount it right here with this surface mount adhesive kit. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this install. The main thing that I was looking for was one, a bigger screen than my phone for navigation. Two, was a backup camera, because as I get a little bit older, it gets a little bit more difficult to turn around and look behind me. All right, that's going to do it for tonight. Thanks for watching. There's going to be 2 videos up here I think you might enjoy. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.